webinar series, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about preparing mentees and their families for successful matches. My name is Jennifer Burgoyne, and I'm a program manager at Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. I'll be guiding today's presentation. This webinar is part of the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series, which is funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention through the National Mentoring Resource Center and facilitated in partnership with Mentor. These webinars would not be possible without the planning team, which includes the mentoring partnerships shown on this slide. In addition to this webinar series, the NMRC provides resources such as free technical assistance and training for mentoring champions just like you. At the end of this webinar, we'll provide more details about how you can access this free support. Before we get started, I wanted to share some housekeeping information. In 1 week, you'll receive an email with information about how to download a copy of these slides and view the webinar recording. You can also access this information directly by going to Mentor's website. It will all be uploaded within the next week. To continually improve this series, we're looking for your input. A short survey will pop up as you exit the webinar. Please take 3 minutes to give us your feedback. We want this to be a participatory experience, so please use the question box to ask questions throughout the webinar. Cheryl Howard-Neal from the Illinois Mentoring Partnership will be queuing up questions to share with panelists during the Q&A portions of the webinar. We likely can't get to all questions because it looks like there's about 250 people on the line right now, but we will try our best. And first, to get a sense of who's with us today, we're going to do a couple short polls. Let me bring up the first one here. The first one, what is your experience level in the mentoring field? Are you a beginner, experienced, expert? Or if you are other, please share what you are in the question box. Give you a moment here to select your answer. Okay, looks like we've got 63% are experienced, 22% beginner, 13% are expert. So welcome to all of you. We think today's information will really apply to everyone who's on the line. And another short poll. We'd love to know, what is your role in the mentoring field? Are you a practitioner, researcher, TA provider, funder, or other? Again, if you're other, please identify what you are in the question box. We'd love to know. Right. So it looks like we've got almost 70% practitioner. That's pretty standard. We get a lot of practitioners on this series. We love having you. 7% technical assistance provider and 20% other. I'm curious to look at what those are after this webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really think today's information is going to benefit a lot of folks on this line. I want to begin today by introducing our 3 expert panelists. We're excited to be joined by Sarah Schwartz, an assistant professor of psychology at Suffolk University in Boston. She holds a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Mass Boston and a master's degree in education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Her research focuses on positive youth development with a particular interest in youth mentoring. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dusty-Ann North. Dusty-Ann has provided training and technical assistance in the field of youth mentoring and related youth services fields since 1995. She draws upon her diverse experience and training to work with direct practice issues, such as communicating with youth, as well as community issues, program design, and interagency partnerships. Dr. North has recently helped to reestablish the California Mentoring Partnership and has convened researchers and advocates to initiate new mentoring research. And finally, we have Jerry. Trainer, consultant, and author Jerry Shirk has worked in the field of youth mentoring for over 20 years. Owner of Mentor Management Systems, Jerry has assisted hundreds of mentoring programs while working with the California Mentoring Partnership, National Mentoring Resource, and the Center for Applied Research Solutions. In addition to the one-to-one model, Jerry has expertise in group mentoring. So thank you to Sarah, Dusty Ann, and Jerry for joining us today. We feel very fortunate to have you on the line, and I'm excited that you'll be able to share your expertise with all attendees. So I'm going to first pass things over to Jerry, who will kick us off.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. We're excited about this workshop. The first thing we're going to do is go over today's topics. So as you can see there on this slide, it focuses on mentee preparedness and caregiver preparedness. And also, I'll be talking for a couple of slides about the effective practices and what they say about mentee and family prep. Dusty Ann will cover research on the topic, and then Sarah will jump in and talk about youth-initiated mentoring and what the research tells us about preparing mentees. I won't read the rest of the bullets, but the last 4 areas will get into specifics about how to prepare mentees and caregivers. So next slide, please. So this is a poll about mentee preparedness. So please select your option of how much attention your program actually gives to preparing mentees and families for the matches. As it says there, select one of the following. We do pre-match orientation and training for mentors and caregivers. The second one is careful intake process, but no explicit mentee training. The third is detailed mentee prep, but not much caregiver prep. And the fourth, we don't give much attention to preparing mentees and caregivers. So we'll give you about 20 or 30 seconds. And the results. So it looks like about half the programs do pre-match orientation and trainings for mentors and caregivers. That's great. Some, let's see, 35%, right around a third, have a careful intake process, but not too much mentee training. 9% detailed mentee prep, but not much caregiver prep. And about 8% at this time don't give much attention to preparing mentees and caregivers. So that's good to know. And I've been working mostly in California with a lot of mentoring programs for about 20 years. I do a lot of work with Dusty Ann, and as we were preparing this, we put our heads together, and what we came up with was our sort of acknowledgement that a lot of programs indicate that mentee training is something that we want to do, but we haven't gotten there yet. So this webinar is going to focus on some of the strategies and some of the tools that you can do to prepare mentees and their families. We're going to focus on both of those topics, but our major focus will be on mentee prep. I'm going to turn it over to Dusty Ann.
Great, thank you, Jerry. Yeah, great to see those results and see a little bit more about where people are at. I noticed that we have a high level of experience on this webinar, and relative to the experiences that Jerry and I've had, which he was just saying, at least, you know, a large number of you are giving at least some really good attention to mentee and family prep, and we think that's great. As Jerry was saying, we often run into programs who don't do that. And I think it's telling that even among such a experienced group, not all of you are feeling like you're all the way there yet, and I think that's very typical of the field. So we're really excited to cover this topic today, and thanks for your answers there. So we wanted to start next with just sort of making an argument of why it's important to prepare mentees and caregivers. And there's a lot of different levels we can think about this on because it's important for several reasons. So you know, number one, always with youth service and with mentoring is safety first. And we really feel strongly that doing careful preparation with mentees and with their families is a major promoter of safety in your program. One sort of inverse way to think about it is if you're counting on just your mentors and contact with your mentors to tell you if things are going well in your match, I'm a little concerned that there could be things happening in the match that you're not knowing about, which means that you need to have a good relationship with your mentees, a good relationship with your caregivers, with their caregivers, I should say, and it also means that they need to feel like there's somewhere to go with concerns and questions. They need to know ahead of time what is considered acceptable and what's not. And mentees really can be the agents of their own safety if they're properly trained on what to expect from their mentors. So one of the big reasons to do preparation at the beginning is to really arm your mentees and their families with as much protection and ammunition as possible to monitor their own safety. And that, of course, will reduce liability for your organization and protect your mentors as well. So that's probably the first and foremost big reason to do it. Number two would be about having better clarity of roles and expectations. We've all had those situations where matches either fell apart or didn't go as well as they could because there was a difference in expectations, or the mentees or caregivers didn't have the same vision of what should be happening as the mentor did or as the program did. So careful preparation up front can really cut down on those problems. We've also found that programs that are able to give some good attention to preparing mentees and families during intake often report that they have a better time keeping mentees committed and motivated, helps them get more out of the match kind of thing, so therefore they're more able to follow through. And then this next one for me is one of the most important reasons, and it comes back to what the purpose and function of mentoring is in the first place. And you know, there's lots of different kinds of mentoring programs doing lots of different kinds of things, but we've always said that what really makes it mentoring is the focus on the relationship and building a relationship and having a healthy relationship. And of course the best case scenario is where the mentor and mentee create a really strong bond and are able to stay in touch over many years and be really important people in each other's lives. But even if that's not the case, having a mentoring experience should provide a template for what having a healthy relationship looks like to a young person, that they should then be able to transfer those experiences and those skills to other relationships. So if we want the experience of mentoring to be an experience in having a healthy relationship and in learning healthy relationship skills, then that means that we really need to be working with our mentees right from the beginning to learn how to have a good relationship and to structure our program in ways that that promote healthy, appropriate, caring relationships. And we think that mentee prep is one of the key ways that you can do that, and caregivers as well. And so going along with that is that it really helps increase the mentee's agency in their matches. Instead of them being kind of an empty vessel that we are pouring mentoring into, they can be active agents in their own experience. And of course, we hope that in the end this will all bring about better match outcomes. So that's why we would want to prepare mentees. And on the next slide, just real quick, why prepare families? We're going to talk more about this later, but we're making sort of a couple of key arguments here today. One is that caregiver engagement tends to be underemphasized or is difficult to achieve in many programs. We recognize that that's a tough area for a lot of programs. And yet we do have some good evidence that caregiver engagement can really support better outcomes for matches and mentees. So that's, in general, engaging caregivers throughout the process. And what we'll argue today is that if you're going to effectively engage families, you need to set that tone early, right from when they first come into the program. So that would be kind of our central argument about why we should prepare families and caregivers for the match. So that's kind of where we're going to head with this today, and we'll present some stuff that we hope leads you to agree. And I'm going to hand it back to Jerry, who's going to talk a little bit about what the elements of effective practice have to say about preparing mentees and families. Thanks, Jerry.
Okay. So we wanted to begin with the foundational materials on this topic. So as Estienne mentioned, we want to look at effective practices and what they say about preparing mentees and families. So many of you know, and we do have a lot of experts on the line, a lot of seasoned people, that the effective practices, they can be found at mentoring.org. They were first developed in 1989. This is their 4th edition. They're essentially research finding on every task that you do to run a mentoring program, starting with recruitment, going to screening, training, matching, and support, monitoring and support and closure. And within the effective practices, they're divided into 2 sections as far as the to-dos. The basics are the benchmarks, and that's what you need to do to run a safe and effective program. And then it moves on to enhancement. So for today's webinar, we've pulled the benchmarks that occur before the match is made and actually during the matching. So the first one is on recruitment and screening. As you can see there, the program engages in recruitment strategies that realistically portray the benefits, practices, supports, and so on being mentored in the program. So basically, you need to give people a clear picture of the program, including their responsibilities. And if you don't, it's less likely that they'll follow through. So this is all about accountability. And so the next one is program has established criteria for accepting youth into the program, as well as criteria that would disqualify a potential participant. And again, that really gets everybody on the same page. People know, the parents know if their son or daughter is should be in the program. A lot of times you look at the mission, the goals, the objectives of the program, and that really establishes your referral criterion. And then parents and mentees agree in writing with the minimum frequency, basically the minimum commitments, and it's all to get everybody on the same page and promote accountability. So next slide, please. And the next 2 points are about training and matching. And as you can see, the program provides mentee trainings on a variety of topics. We're actually going to go over some of those topics today. We're going to give you a sample agenda. And then, of course, you need to cover risk management. We found in mentoring programs, the #1 thing that you need to have in a youth mentoring program is safety. If you don't have safety, you really don't have a mentoring program. The second bullet, program provides training for parents on a variety of topics, basically the same thing. So an orientation or a training to let them know about the program. And then the second 2 points are about matching. And recently the effective practices have actually added the term initiation to matching. So now it's matching and initiation. So through the research, they've seen that initiating the match, and the suggestion is for the mentor, the mentee, and the program person to meet and to go over the requirements, make sure everybody's comfortable, and then have everybody sign off in front of each other. And again, that promotes accountability. So let's see, next slide, please. So the effective practices, there are 2 documents, and again, we're in the 4th edition of the effective practices. They came out with the latest edition through Mentor about 6 or 8 months ago. They're very welcome. There's always a lot of work that goes into these, and they're really, the effective practices are what we have in mentoring to guide programs. So they can be found in 2 versions at Mentor, and we have the link there at the bottom. The first is the checklist. So if you don't have a copy of the checklist, we suggest that you try to download a copy. Of course, everything is at no cost. And it just takes you through a shortened version of what those effective practices are in the 6 core areas of recruitment, screening, training, etc. And you can also download the extended version, which is 90-some pages. So this is good for really digging into your policies and procedures and how you do things in your program, and it's also great for grant writing. One of the things that the Effective Practices has is a third area called justifications. So for those of you who are writing grants and describing what you're going to do in your mentoring program, you can look at the Effective Practices, describe what you're going to do, and then the justifications are actually the citations of the research for why you're doing things in a certain way. Now, next slide, there's actually another document, because in the past 3 slides we've talked about the effective practices, including the participants signing contracts. We want you to know there's a great no-cost resource online, and this is called the Generic Mentoring Program Policy and Procedure Manual. So if you Google that term, it'll come up in a digital form. It has a hypothetical name for the program. I believe it's New Vision. So if you, in Word document, do the find and replace and put in New Visions and then your program's name, you're going to be about 80% done as you get started developing your policies and procedures. So in terms of mentee preparedness and parent preparedness, it has all kinds of forms and letters, the sign-offs, the contracts that you'll be using. So it's very valuable. I think it's been around for 10 or 12 years, and I'm sure hundreds, if not thousands, of programs have used this. So next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about the different situations, and they'll call on different strategies really for your mentoring program, because there's no one-size-fits-all for mentee and parent preparedness. So you have all kinds of models that, of course, the 2 major models are one-to-one and group, and then there's some other models like team mentoring. And how you develop your strategies and trainings for mentees will depend on their ages. Whether you onboard them one at a time is also going to, it's really going to define what you're going to tell them and what kind of an orientation and what you can actually do is if you're looking at group orientations, you can still use some of the same strategies, and we'll get into this as you sit individually with people. And then the different situations go into the special needs, whether they're foster youth, juvenile justice involved, or if they have disabilities, and then the program focus. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today, what we'll be talking about is the motivating mentee and helping them feel okay about it. We have a term called normalizing. We want mentees to feel that they're not an odd person because they can use the benefit of a mentor. So we want to help normalize it. So depending on the program focus, if they're college-bound, if it's a technology-based, if it's outdoors or nature program or photography, something that they really want to do, you may not have to do as much work motivating them to want to be involved in mentoring. So it's the same, or actually a similar topic down below, voluntary versus mandated mentees. If they're voluntary, if they want to be in the program, you won't have to work as hard. If they're mandated, you're going to have to use some strategies to help get them on board. I was working with a program here in San Diego several years ago, and it was a probation department program, and they had trouble at first getting their mentees into the program, and the program coordinator just came up with a very simple strategy, and her strategy was she would explain the program to them, even though they might be mandated by the probation officer or subtly mandated. She would say, well, why don't you give it a try? And she said that she didn't really have any problems after that when she asked the mentees, why don't you give it a try? So now I'm going to turn it over to Dustienne.
Thanks, Jerry. So what we've done so far is just to kind of present some basic concepts of why mentee prep is important and caregiver prep, and where it falls in the elements of effective practice. And then Jerry was just giving some thoughts about the fact that how you approach it will vary depending on your program. So now we want to just switch gears and talk a little bit about what the research has to say about our topic today. And I'm going to cover just sort of some general basics of what the research has to say. And then we're very excited. We'll be hearing from Dr. Schwartz in just a few minutes about some of her special findings from youth-initiated mentoring. So the headline about research on mentee prep is there's not much. Just like a lot of programs are not feeling like they're able to give that as much attention as they'd like, there's been almost no attention to it in the youth mentoring research. I did notice some attention to it in adult mentoring, particularly in like education and medicine. There was at least a few articles that gave some attention to the notion that mentees don't just receive services, that they need to be trained to cultivate their mentors, they need to be trained to make the best use of their mentors, etc. And we thought that was kind of interesting that this is given attention for adults and not for youth, and it goes back to the point I made earlier that it may be that we're doing a little too much viewing our mentees as empty vessels rather than agents in their own experience. There was one place, and it came up in at least 2 studies, and there's probably others, where there was some mention of the need for mentee prep, although I didn't find any really good research on how to do it or what's worked or what hasn't, but there was at least a recommendation in a couple of studies, and those studies were specifically focused on cultural responsivity or cultural sensitivity or cultural competence and how to improve cultural interactions in matches. And at least 2 studies on that topic specifically recommended that better mentee preparation and mentee training would improve those cross-cultural interactions. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. And then, like I said, we'll hear from Sarah in just a few minutes about some findings she's gleaned in doing youth-initiated mentoring, because in some of those programs they do a lot more mentee training and prep, because those are programs where mentees actually go out and find their own mentors. So they, of course, have to get training in how to do that. So I think Sarah's findings will be really helping to start to get at this issue that's not really been addressed very well in the literature up until now. So we'll hear from her in just a second, and I want to turn quickly in the next slide to what the research says about family engagement. And there's some great research here, especially from Basaldo, DeMonico, and Spencer, but I did find a couple other sources here about the importance of parent involvement in mentoring and the fact that it's often de-emphasized. Sometimes this is because it's tough to get parents involved, but in a lot of cases it's because we really think of mentoring as a dyad and we really try to emphasize that dyad, and that's valid. But what these researchers' findings were is that not only are parents not always engaged as much as they could be, they're even sometimes more likely to be seen as a barrier to the dyadic match by staff, and that staff then tend to carry those ideas over to the mentors, who then come into the match a little bit wary of interacting with parents rather than welcoming and eager and interested to interact with parents. So that's a really recent and interesting and important set of findings, and it's especially important because we do have some studies that show that better caregiver engagement is likely to support better outcomes for matches and mentees. So that would mean that there's a disconnect here between the way our field is viewing family engagement and what would actually be best for the matches and for the mentees. And then I thought it was nice that Basaldo, DeMonico, and Spencer made this other really important point, which is that in addition to why this is important for individual matches, when we consider the fact that most mentors and a lot of staff, but not all, and this is a generalization, of course, but that there are big class and race differences between our mentors and our families who we're serving. So often we have people of higher socioeconomic income, more likely to be white, etc., who are doing the mentoring, and families are more likely to be working class and more likely to be of color, that this makes it even more important that we do a better job respecting and involving parents in our matches. So that's some key findings that we thought were really important about why it's important to engage families. And again, for today, why this is relevant is because if you're going to engage families, then they need to be well prepared for the match. So that's what we have from the research. It's not tons to go on in terms of mentee prep, but it does offer some interesting insights. And with that, this is why we're so excited to have Sarah here today, Dr. Schwartz, who has some very new findings to share with us. So I'll hand it off to Sarah.
Great, thanks, Destian. So as Destian already noted, really my research that I'll be presenting today is coming less from traditional formal mentoring and more from this new model of youth-initiated mentoring, which is really a hybrid model that combines elements of natural mentoring relationships, the ones that form organically between young people and the adults in their community, and formal mentoring relationships where there's actually a program scaffolding the relationship. So in youth-initiated mentoring, the model is that youth are trained to reach out to potential mentors from their existing social network. And again, as Destian noted, one thing that I really loved about youth-initiated mentoring and why I was drawn to it was that it really recognizes the agency of the youth rather than looking at them more as a passive recipient of mentoring, and it empowers them to go out and recruit mentors themselves. One thing I should note before I jump into my research is that it tends to be more relevant to an older mentee population rather than younger mentees, and the research that I've done has really been primarily on adolescents. I think a positive of that is that research shows us that there tend to be a lot more challenges to formal mentoring relationships with older mentees. The relationships tend to be less close and less enduring. So I think that really, particularly when we're talking about older mentees, that mentee training can be really key. So turning to the next slide, the Connected Scholars program is kind of the next iteration of the youth-initiated mentoring model, and it's a program that I developed with colleagues that really takes youth-initiated mentoring a step further by simply teaching youth the skills that they need to identify and reach out to mentors without ever actually formalizing the mentoring relationship. So our question was, would it be enough to just provide workshops to young people about how to identify and recruit and maintain mentoring relationships, and then let them kind of go out in the world and use those skills? And I think the answer is for some young people that would be enough, and for some they still need the formal scaffolding of a mentoring relationship. But what you can see here is an outline of some of the lessons that we have. This version of the workshop, we have several versions at this point, is really focused more on recruiting academic and career mentors, ideally during a kind of transition from high school to college. So one model for this Connected Scholars program is doing it on its own. Another that some formal mentoring programs are starting to implement is actually having mentees go through this training at the end of a formal mentoring relationship. So when they graduate from the program, learning to recruit natural mentors, as well as for programs that end in high school, helping kind of prepare them to think about mentoring relationships in college. That said, and what I'm going to be focusing on today, I think that some of these lessons could be really helpful to mentees as pre-match training, particularly some of the first couple of lessons really thinking about particularly this question of how can mentors help me? Because I think we often assume that mentees already know that, and generally they don't. So actually in the next few slides, I'm going to share some qualitative findings from our first pilot study of the Connected Scholars program, so you can see some of the changes that occurred as the result of the workshop. So this first slide that I have actually is some quotations from our participants before the workshop started. And they speak to some of these barriers that get in the way of them connecting with mentors. And I think these are really
a little bit.
Okay. Okay. Are we good? Was that me? Or I'll try to.
Yeah, it's unclear. It might have been the internet connection because Dusty and cut off too. So Jerry and I were still
Sorry about that.
Yeah. No,
okay,
no worries at all. Yeah, but maybe go back.
That's why the slide's called Barriers to Connection. Huh?
Exactly. I like
network
that.
connectivity. Yeah.
Yeah, technology also can be a barrier to connection. So I was just talking about again, first this attitude of I need to figure things out by myself, and the focus on independence, which is particularly true in our society for young men, but I think more generally also that there's, particularly for adolescents, there's a strong push towards independence. And then the second quotation was about the often cultural taboos around talking to someone outside of the family about your personal issues, or your the idea of, you don't air your dirty laundry. And so these were both themes that came up in interviews with teenagers before they went through the workshop. And I think, again, it's just really important for us to think about some of these barriers to connection so that we're not looking at mentees as, they're just being sullen, they're just not making the most of their mentoring relationships, but instead they have really good reasons maybe for not jumping into the connection with their mentor. So the next two slides share some quotes from interviews conducted after the workshop and describe some changes that we saw in knowledge and attitudes and skills related to cultivating mentoring relationships. So one young man said, I learned that it's good to go out and make connections because even if you don't need them now, as long as you keep in touch with the person, you never know what might come up in the future. And I think, again, thinking about this quote and the next one, I always used to be the guy who just sits around because I didn't like approaching people. Now I'm like, I should go for it because you're always going to need someone there to help you, somebody by your side, someone who always had your back. And this was, I think, quite striking for us, again, particularly in light of the pre-intervention interviews where there was really a strong emphasis on independence and, I shouldn't need help. I should figure things out by myself. And now they were saying, you know what? We all need connections. And finally, one person just said, I'm more likely to want to look for a mentor right now after going through this training because I see why mentors can be helpful. And on the next slide, we have just a couple quotes more about some of the specific skills that they got out of the workshop. So one young woman said, the workshop made me learn the skills I needed to communicate more and stay more in contact with somebody. Another said, now when I email program staff in my after-school program, I say, thank you very much for all the support that you gave me throughout the project. And finally, I learned there's steps you've got to go through to keep a relationship going. So you can imagine that these adolescents would really make great mentees who would take advantage of what their mentor has to offer and really hold up their end of the relationship. So going through this training, I think really gave them a sense of having the motivation to want to use a mentor and knowing that I contribute something to the relationship as well. So again, just thinking about this, I would want to mentor these students. So in sum, just moving to the last slide, we, as Destian already noted, we often focus so much on the mentor side of the relationship, and in our research, in our programs, when we think of how we can strengthen the mentoring relationship, we generally turn to mentor training and thinking about what we can do to help the mentors connect better with the mentees. But what we're seeing from some of our workshops is that mentee training can also allow youth to get a lot more out of their mentoring relationship, and that we often assume that all adolescents are motivated to connect with their mentor, and we assume that they have the skills to do so, and that's just not necessarily the case. But by providing mentee training, we can actually address both the kind of motivation and skills piece. And then more broadly, And again, Desian noted that part of the goal of mentoring is to help youth have healthy relationships in general, and not just with that assigned mentor. So I think some of this training can help more broadly give youth a skill set that they can use throughout their lives to recruit informal mentors in all settings. So I think it can be quite powerful. And I guess I will stop there and might jump back in at a later time.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much to all three of you. So we are going to have a second part of this webinar where we'll discuss more hands-on implementable strategies for mentee prep and what your program can do to prepare and train mentees. But we thought we'd take a short break here and answer any questions you may have. So I'm going to pass it over to Cheryl in Illinois and see if we've gotten any questions thus far.
We do have some pretty good questions for the group. One of the things that's come up for a number of folks, they're asking that in terms of engagement, is there anything that best practice kind of tells us about if the mentor and the parent do not speak the same language? Are there any best practice around how you navigate that?
I could jump in if that's helpful. Sure. Yeah, I think that's a tough one, and it does come up. It does come up somewhat regularly. I think part of it is so the easy answer, except it's the hard answer when it comes to implementation, is that whenever possible, we should be building programs that are built to work with the families that we serve, which means that even if the mentor doesn't speak the same language as the parent, that hopefully somebody in the program does speak that language if possible, and that extra effort is made to reach across language lines. Now, I realize, of course, that we're all strapped with budgets and we're all doing the best we can with little, so that's not always possible. So yeah, it's tough if there's a language barrier. That makes it extra tough. I don't have easy answers about that. One suggestion I might make is try to get a sense of how the family deals with that disconnect. Any family where the parents don't speak English very well deals with that in every setting. So sometimes it's that the child is helping translate. Sometimes there's another maybe friend of the family or family member who is better for helping translate as much as possible. So look for those particular ways that family functions and try not to just write off the parent because they don't speak English. So I realize these are not ideal solutions, but that's sort of my best first thought at it. I don't know if Jerry or Sarah or Jen have any other thoughts.
I think that was good at the end. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, I was just trying to unmute. I think that was a great answer, and as I have reviewed the research, I really haven't seen much on that. I would just sort of piggyback on that. If they're speaking another language, there's probably some cultural concerns too. The program would need to, and I think you talked about this a bit, Destian, need to understand the cultural aspects, the differences that come with somebody that speaks another language.
Yeah, for sure. Great
question. I think we have time. Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Cheryl, do we have one more we could do during this Q&A? We also have another Q&A session at the end of the webinar.
We do have another one. So in thinking about the training for mentees, and everyone on the call seems to really favor that. They think that's a great idea, training mentees and parents to understand more about the relationship. Folks are a little curious about how do you navigate, training mentees and letting them know, the good and maybe the not so good. How do you present that without scaring the mentees and the families off? That all these bad things might happen, all these risky things might happen. How do you kind of broker that, the good stuff with maybe the not so good stuff? How do you present it?
That's a good question. Sometimes when I'm training actually both the mentors and the mentees, when you get into issues like confidentiality, reporting, child abuse, sexual abuse, it's really not a fun time in the training, but you really need to do it. You really need to cover it for safety's sake. So I talk about it. I say it's really important. Kit. We hope that we don't have to use it, but just in case, we need to be equipped. And I think you just really have to go the extra mile. Try not to make people uncomfortable, but you have to cover these safety issues. I mean, it's just so important that you do so. And it comes into play in other areas or even similar areas, and that's like when the mentee or when the mentor might have to report child abuse, and they're reluctant to do that because they're worried about the relationship with the mentee and the parents. Well, if you have social workers come in and talk about it like we have here in San Diego sometimes at the Mentoring Coalition, they'll almost get on their knees and beg people to report any suspicion. So again, you just have to cover it. It can be a little painful. Again, I use the first aid kit analogy. Christiane, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I would add, I think those are great thoughts, Jer. What I would add is that I think you can build confidence in the program by starting with, here are all the things we are already doing to make sure that this is going to be a safe and fun and constructive experience for you. We've already really carefully vetted people. We're giving them a lot of training. We're being really careful. But in the end, you are the only person who knows what's going to be okay with you. And I think one thing to remember when it comes to things like preparing them for safety and preparing them for boundaries and that kind of stuff, and I've seen some good trainings on, issues of child predators making it into programs and stuff like that. And a point that they always make is that, yes, we have to worry about that rare, scary person who is really sociopathic and does an incredible job of making their way through our screening and our training processes, seeming like an amazing mentor, only to groom somebody for a really horrible experience. There is that rare situation, and we do want to prepare people for that. But what we run into much more often are lesser evils, let's call them. So unclear boundaries, or mentors working out unconscious issues with their kids in ways that aren't healthy. They're not criminal and they're not dangerous exactly, but they're not exactly healthy either. And they're not doing it on purpose. So I think those issues come up more, and I think if you emphasize that more, just remind folks, look, these are people just like you, doing their best. They want to help out, but they're imperfect also. And again, you are the only person as the mentee, and you are the only person as the caregiver or the only family who knows what your family needs. And it could be that this mentor is very well intended and a good person, but just not interacting in a way that's okay with you. And we want to know that. So I think emphasizing the lesser evils can make it a little less scary. And what we know about those topics is that those issues come up much more frequently anyway. So it might be more realistic.
All right. Thank you both. And thank you, Cheryl, for finding those questions, and thanks to everyone for sending them in. We will have another Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but for now, we'll move on to our next session.
Great. Okay, so that was actually a great segue, because now that we've laid out some of the concepts and some of the reasons to do all of this, and given what we hope is a thorough framing on why and how mentee and caregiver prep is important, now we want to help get to hands-on. How do you do it? What does it look like? What does it mean? And so what we have on this slide are two lists. One is, what are some of the steps and processes that you can use to prepare mentees? And you saw earlier in the presentation when Jerry took us through the elements of effective practice that are relevant to this, and you saw that it actually falls under several steps in the intake process. So it starts right with recruitment, it goes all the way through screening, training, matching, etc. So this is not a one-time, the idea of mentee preparation is not a one-time thing. Oh, I've done my intake, now I need to prepare. The preparation happens all the way through, beginning with first contact. the intake process that you do for each individual mentee and family, every step can be set up to orient and guide them through the process and prepare them for a good match. Then, of course, you can and should, if you can, do group orientations and or trainings for your mentees, just like you do with your mentors. An orientation would be, this is what to expect out of the program. Is this something that you want to do? And then a training would come once they have decided they want to be part of the program, and now they get some skill building and some preparation on how to get the most out of the match. And then even into how you make the match, when you make the match, how you initiate matches, all of those things can be structured towards preparing for a positive match. So you want to think about it every step of the way until they're matched and going. And of course you want to keep thinking about it, but at that point we're beyond preparation and into implementation. The second list on this slide is then, so as you're walking folks through those steps and processes, what strategies can you use? And so we just want you to be thinking sort of outside the box about the idea that almost everything you do during the intake process is either modeling healthy relationships and healthy matches or not. So you can be asking yourself, is the way I'm doing this structuring folks for a healthy experience, or am I sending the wrong message? So first and foremost is always your own interactions with your mentees. They should be getting a sense from you what kind of treatment to expect from their mentors long before they meet their mentors and all the way through. And you as staff are a supplemental person that they can come to with problems. There is a relationship there between the staff and the mentees, and it begins before the match. It should never, of course, take the place of the mentor relationship, but it needs to be there as a backup and as a supportive network around the match. So each interaction with a mentee will be modeling for them what to expect out of the program and what makes a healthy relationship. Whether your intake process is thoughtful, so if they come in feeling like, wow, this has really been thought through and they've really accounted for what I might be concerned about and they've taken care of everything, that's going to make them feel a lot safer and help them look for that in other relationships and from their mentor. And then, of course, formal training and activities are also great strategies, and that's where you can really take apart some of the issues and talk with them in more depth about concerns they have, about issues that might come up. You can do activities that teach them skills. So those are other strategies. And then this last bullet is just to remind us that how the program is structured throughout the match will also either model healthy or not so healthy relationships. And my favorite example of that is that we tell young people, you know, you shouldn't talk to strangers and you should never get into a car with somebody you don't know. But sometimes in mentoring programs we say, don't worry, we've screened this person. I know you just met and you don't even have 2 words to say to this person yet, but go on, get in their car, jump in, have fun, drive off into the sunset. And that can be a mixed message for a young person who's been told to be a little bit more careful than that. And so we do want to give them a chance to build trust slowly with their mentors and comfortably. They should feel comfortable. So maybe group activities at the beginning while they're still getting to know each other, maybe supervised settings for the first month or 2, anything to reduce tension and increase safety until they feel safe moving on to the next step. Okay, so that's just an overview slide on what mentee preparation might look like. And Jerry is going to take off with that into some more detail about how to do actual training.
Okay, thank you, Dusty-Ann. And I'm actually going to go over this slide really quickly. I think we're a little bit behind, and the 2 or 3 slides after this one I think are more important. But of course you need to make sure all your program operations are in place before you do your training, because you'll be answering questions and telling them processes, and if you don't know what to do, then you're not going to be able to tell them what to do. Assess your objectives for the training. Of course, every training needs to be about safety first, but then look at your mentee population. Is it more about motivation or making them feel okay about being in the program? Is it more about accountability? Of course, for your materials and your trainings, make them age appropriate. That gets into the length of the training. So when I train younger mentees, I might go 30 or 45 minutes. When I train older mentees, I might go 90 minutes to a couple hours. And then, of course, whether it's group or solo training. So next slide, please. So the next slide, I believe, gets really into the nuts and the bolts of what a mentee training might look like. So I had a mentoring program, several of them actually in San Diego City schools for about 6 years, and I took my mentees through an initial training, and this is pretty much what it looked like. So it doesn't look that much different actually than a mentor training, except it can be a little bit shorter. But I open up with a welcome and warmer. You want to get them moving around and comfortable and not just sitting there with their arms folded. Then I go into a brief program overview, and the reason I do it briefly to start out, now this is whether with mentors or with mentees, is I don't want to sit there and talk 50 minutes about the structure of the program. It gets kind of boring. So I'll just give them a thumbnail sketch of the program. Then I'll talk about some of the mentoring research for the mentees, how they can benefit from having a mentor, and that people in big businesses and athletes and people in corporations have mentors and coaches. And then I usually do an exercise, and in a moment we'll show you the exercise on the next page. But the one I typically do is called Build an Ideal Mentor, and it's fun and it's very interactive. Then at some point you want to get back into the program rules and guidelines, and I usually do it after an exercise where they've had a lot of fun, so you know, they won't have been sitting there the whole time and be talking to them, and they're ready to at least sit for 20 minutes or so and hear about the program rules and guidelines. And this is where you get the mentors or the mentees and the mentors on the same page, because you'll be telling the mentees, of course, the same program rules and guidelines and boundary issues that you'll be telling the mentors. And then a short session on, or short module on how to utilize your mentor in activities for the match, questions, comments, and so forth. So the next slide is an exercise that I've actually done hundreds of times, and I've done it with mentees, I've done it with mentors. On the left side you can see a mentee describing his ideal mentor, but it's usually after I talk about mentoring in general and maybe a little bit of the research and for mentees how they can benefit. Then I break people up into groups of 5, 6, or 7. I give them a piece of flip chart paper or poster board and markers. I ask them to draw an outline of an individual with no details at first. Then one at a time, but multiple times, I ask them to go up and draw the trait of an ideal mentor at the part of the body where that might originate. So you can see on the left side, this is a mentee. He's drawn a heart. He's drawn somebody speaking. He's drawn ears. He's drawn curly hair, maybe somebody that looks like him, a peace sign. I can't remember what the gold chain is for. Goatee maybe is for a little bit cool. On the right side, you can see I've done it with the mentors also. And so what I typically do is with the mentees, we'll go through this process, and we'll have them display their ideal mentors afterwards. I'll put them side by side. I'll ask them, what are some of the common traits and qualities? And I usually make the point, because it's almost always there, that a good mentor has a heart and ears. And I really believe that those are connected. And that if a mentor has big ears, he or she has a big heart, because they're listening and they're focused on the mentee. So what I'll tell the mentees is that we're going to do the same exercise with the mentors. And I'm going to take your drawings. They're not going to see your drawings before they do it, before they create their ideal mentor. But afterwards, we're going to reveal them. And I'll tell the mentees, the mentors will come up with literally the same things as you do. And that's what I'll tell the mentors, too. As you can see by the drawings, that the mentees want the same thing. So it kind of makes a connection between the mentees and the mentors. And the people really love it, whether they're mentees or mentors, and it does so many things. First of all, it's fun. It gets them up, it gets them moving around, it gets them laughing and joking about their art skills. There's a lot of laughter during this exercise. It also helps mentees who are not that hip on having a mentor. Sometimes that normalizes when somebody sees another person their own age go up and draw a heart as the first thing. they realize, okay, it's okay for me to want somebody with a heart. It also helps them, and Dr. Sarah talked about youth-initiated mentoring. Whether it's a structured program or not, it helps them think about other people in their life. It doesn't have to be a structured program, but I want to connect with somebody that listens to me, that has a heart, that has direction in their life, and so on and so forth. And then also, I think that what it does too, whether you talk about it or not, it gives them the skills because they are going to be mentors too, whether it's in a formal program or if they're mentoring their little brother and sister. So that's really a good exercise. It almost always works. What I find is that if you can find one exercise, it doesn't have to be this one, but if you can find one exercise to do in either a mentor or mentee training and feel comfortable with it, it'll make your training feel so much better to you, because we all get a little nervous when we're training. If we have something that we know is going to work, we can kind of look towards that and point towards that and build on either side of that. So next slide, please. The next slide is, it's out of Training New Mentees, and we have actually handouts that are over in your control panel. There are 5 handouts. A couple of them are full workbooks, and this is out of one of the workbooks. And it's this exercise, I use it for younger mentees. It's called Launching the Relationship, and it's just using a concept of you're getting ready to go on a ship, and you can have so many pounds, and each item weighs a certain amount of pounds, and there's more actually in the exercise than are listed on this slide. But it has them choose and then discuss why they chose those specific things. And the next slide, I think the next slide is Dustian's.
Yeah, and thanks, Jerry, for explaining those 2 activities. And in the resources we've given you, there's quite a lot of activities you can do with youth. Another one that we've given you is called Pet Peeves, and it actually addresses the question that we had earlier about how do you do training with mentees around boundary issues without scaring them too badly. And Pet Peeves is the way you can do that, where you get kids talking about what some of their personal pet peeves are and how they like to be interacted with, and lead that into a discussion of what to expect from their mentor. So that's another activity you can do along those lines. So lots of activities in your little toolbook that we've given you that you can think about. And we just wanted to quickly make the point that if you are in a program situation where you don't have a group of mentees that you're going to be able to train all at once, maybe you have them trickling in one by one, or for various reasons you have to prepare them one by one,